Liam felt the weight of the silence more than any spoken insult. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven from the threads of condescension and quiet judgment that filled the grand dining room of his mother-in-law, Helena. The crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier, the silverware was impossibly heavy, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with a frequency of wealth he could never quite tune into. He was a carpenter. His hands were calloused and strong, accustomed to the honest grain of wood, not the cold, smooth surfaces of inherited silver. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife, Isabella, laughed at something her brother Marcus had said. It was a brittle, theatrical sound, designed for performance. She glanced at Liam, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of something between pity and annoyance, before she turned back to her family. They were a perfect trio. Helena, the matriarch, with eyes as hard and appraised as the diamonds on her fingers. Marcus, whose smug confidence was built on a foundation of unearned privilege. And Isabella, the beautiful, cruel centerpiece of his life. "The renovations are coming along, I suppose?" Helena said, her voice dripping with faint praise that felt more like a critique. She didn't look at Liam, but the question was aimed at him like a carefully thrown dart. "Though I do worry about the dust. It gets into everything." "Liam is very careful," Isabella answered for him, patting his hand in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate, but felt like a public claim of ownership over a slightly embarrassing pet. "He knows how important this house is to our family's history. It was always our family, our history, never his." He had poured every cent of his life's savings, nearly $80,000 earned through sweat and splinters, into restoring the aging mansion. He'd spent weekends and evenings replastering walls, sanding floors, and rebuilding the dilapidated porch, all while Isabella and her family discussed which caterer to use for their next garden party. The house was in Isabella's name, a gift from her parents upon their marriage. It was a constant, unspoken reminder of his place. The dinner dragged on, a slow-motion performance of their family's superiority. Marcus bragged about a stock tip that had paid off, while Helena recounted a tedious story about shaming a sommelier at a Michelin star restaurant. Liam ate his food, his posture perfect, his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that passivity was his only shield. To speak was to offer them a target. Then came the moment that would shatter his carefully constructed peace. Isabella cleared her throat, a small, deliberate sound that cut through the conversation like a blade. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sheaf of papers bound in a crisp blue legal cover. She slid it across the table toward him. The gesture was casual, but the air in the room instantly became charged with a new, dangerous electricity. "Darling," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "As we're consolidating our assets and planning for the future, our financial advisor insisted we get this little formality out of the way." She smiled, but it didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "It's just a postnuptial agreement to protect the family estate, you understand." Helena and Marcus watched him, their faces masks of feigned nonchalance. This was a coordinated ambush. The humiliation was the point. They wanted to see him squirm, to put him in his place in the most public, legally binding way possible. The document lay between them on the table, an accusation in paper and ink. It was a declaration that he, Liam, was a threat, a potential gold digger, a man who could not be trusted. "It's just standard practice, Liam," Marcus chimed in, leaning back in his chair with an air of worldly authority. "Anyone with significant assets does it. You wouldn't understand." "Of course," Liam said, his voice quiet. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to scream, to throw the papers in her face, to walk out and never look back. But he was trapped by the 10 years he had invested, by the love he thought he had, by the hope that things might one day get better. "There's no need to even read it," Isabella said breezily, pushing a pen towards him. "It's all boilerplate legal stuff. Just sign at the bottom, and we can move on to dessert." Her words hung in the air, a cruel, dismissive command. "Sign away your dignity, sign away your worth, sign here to confirm you are nothing." With the eyes of all three of them burning into him, his hand trembling slightly, Liam picked up the pen. He didn't read a single word. He just signed his name, the ink flowing like a river of shame. The moment the signature was complete, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through Isabella and her family. The performance was over. He had played his part. Later that night, long after the hollow charade of their life had been put to bed, Liam lay awake. Isabella slept beside him, a serene, untroubled sleep of the victor. The humiliation from the dinner table had cooled into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He couldn't shake the image of the document, of his own signature sealing his status as an outsider in his own marriage. He slipped out of bed, his movements silent and practiced. He knew where she kept her important papers. In the expensive leather briefcase she carried everywhere, a prop to signify her self-proclaimed business acumen. He found it by her desk in the study he had built for her. His hands, usually so steady, fumbled with the clasp. Inside, nestled amongst glossy investment brochures and business cards, was the original Prenup. His signature looked alien to him, a testament to his weakness. He couldn't take the original, but his eyes fell on the printer/scanner in the corner of the room. It was a machine he had set up for her, just another of his unacknowledged contributions to her comfortable life. With painstaking slowness, he lifted the lid, the soft whir of the scanner sounding like a jet engine in the silent house. He made a copy, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and defiance. He folded the copied pages carefully and tucked them into the waistband of his pajama bottoms. He replaced the original document exactly as he had found it, closed the briefcase and crept back to bed. He didn't know why he had done it. He didn't understand the complex legal language that filled the pages, but as he lay in the darkness, the crinkle of the hidden paper against his skin felt like a secret. It was a small, solitary act of rebellion. It was a mystery seed planted in the barren soil of his marriage, holding a potential he could not yet begin to comprehend. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than resignation. He felt a flicker of something else, something that might one day grow into a reckoning. Their story had not started this way. 10 years ago, Isabella had been captivated by what she called his rugged authenticity. He was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands, a stark contrast to the soft, manicured men of her social circle. She had pursued him with a fierce determination, seeing him as a fascinating project, a rustic jewel she could polish and display. Liam, who had known only a life of hard work and simple decency, was swept away by her glamour. He mistook her intensity for passion, her possessiveness for love. He believed her when she said she wanted to escape her family's stuffy, materialistic world. He didn't realize she had no intention of escaping it. She just wanted to bring him into it as her most interesting acquisition. The early years were a blur of him trying to fit in. He traded his work boots for loafers that pinched his feet, and his comfortable flannel for starched shirts that chafed his neck. He stood silently at her side during endless cocktail parties, nodding and smiling as her friends talked about yachts and summer homes in the Hamptons. He was the carpenter husband, a charming novelty. The small cuts began almost immediately. It was the way she would correct his grammar in front of others, the way she would laugh off his opinions on art or politics as adorably unsophisticated, the way she managed their finances, giving him a small allowance like a child, even though his own income from his growing carpentry business was respectable. He had handed over control, believing it was what was expected of him. The renovation of the house was supposed to be their joint project, a symbol of the life they were building. Liam had drawn up the plans himself, envisioning a warm, inviting home, but every decision was overruled by Isabella and her mother. His suggestions for reclaimed wood were dismissed as common, his desire for a cozy fireplace replaced by a cold, minimalist hearth. Yet it was his labor, his skill, and his money that brought their vision to life. He worked until his muscles ached, pouring his soul into a house that felt less like his home with every nail he drove. Isabella and her family, meanwhile, were masters of illusion. They spoke of the family fortune as if it were an endless, self-replicating entity. In reality, Liam slowly began to realize it was a facade. The old money was very old indeed, and dwindling fast. Helena was a compulsive spender, and Marcus had a knack for disastrous investments. Their entire lifestyle was a precarious house of cards built on credit, reputation, and the perceived value of the ancestral home. Their desperation made them crueler, more obsessed with appearances. They needed to project an image of effortless wealth to secure the loans and partnerships that kept them afloat. Liam, with his simple honesty and lack of pretense, was a constant, irritating reminder of a reality they refused to acknowledge. His very presence was a threat to their narrative. A week after the humiliating dinner, holding the folded copy of the Prenup, Liam knew he couldn't live in this state of willful ignorance any longer. The document felt hot in his pocket, a constant reminder of his subservient role. He looked up local law offices online, deliberately avoiding the large, expensive firms that Isabella's family used. He found a small, unassuming practice in a quieter part of town. Arthur Vance, Esquire. Arthur Vance was a man who seemed to blend into his surroundings. His office was filled with more books than furniture, and he wore a slightly rumpled tweed jacket. He was in his late 60s, with kind, perceptive eyes that seemed to see right through the nervous excuses Liam started to make. "My wife, we just signed something." "A formality," Liam stammered, placing the copied pages on the cluttered desk. Arthur picked up the document and began to read, his expression unreadable. He was silent for a long time, the only sound in the room the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Liam shifted in his seat, feeling foolish. He was probably overreacting. It was just boilerplate, like Isabella had said. "Mr. Collins," Arthur said finally, looking up from the papers. His voice was calm, but there was a new intensity in his eyes. "Where did you get married?" "Here in the city," Liam replied, confused by the question. "And this house, the one mentioned here?" Arthur tapped a paragraph heavy with legal descriptions. "It has been in your wife's family for a long time?" "Yes, for generations, they say. It's the cornerstone of their estate." Arthur leaned back in his chair, which creaked like an old church door. "I see," he said slowly. "There is something very unusual in the wording here. It's drafted with a certain aggressive precision. It seeks to waive any and all of your potential claims. But the legal description of the property is extremely specific. I'd like to do some research, if you'll permit me. I need to go to the county records office." As Liam left the small law office, a seed of hope, tiny and fragile, began to sprout within him. He had taken a step. He had pushed back in his own quiet way. Meanwhile, Isabella's arrogance had reached new heights. She had recently reconnected with Julian Croft, a real estate developer, with a predatory smile and a reputation for ruthless deals. He was everything Isabella admired, wealthy, powerful, and utterly dismissive of anyone he deemed beneath him. An affair began almost immediately, a sordid and barely concealed betrayal. Isabella started coming home late, smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't Liam's. She took calls in hushed, secretive tones. She and Julian were planning a new venture, a luxury condominium project, and they needed capital. The plan, which they discussed with Marcus and Helena in front of Liam as if he were invisible, was to mortgage the family home to the hilt. "The bank has already pre-approved the loan," Marcus boasted one evening, swirling a glass of brandy. "They see the value. The Croft-Montgomery name carries weight." He conveniently omitted Liam's surname. "Julian thinks we can triple our investment in 2 years," Isabella added, her eyes gleaming with avarice. She looked over at Liam, who was quietly clearing the table. "Liam, be a dear and fetch us another bottle of the good port, will you?" The command was delivered with the casual cruelty she had perfected. He was no longer her husband, he was her help. He complied, his face a stony mask, but inside a cold rage was beginning to build. They were planning to leverage the very house he had poured his life and savings into to fund a future with her lover, and they didn't even have the decency to hide it. Their overconfidence was absolute. They were so utterly convinced of his weakness, of his powerlessness, that they saw no need for discretion. They had no idea that a quiet, unassuming lawyer was about to pull a thread that would unravel their entire world. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Liam was on a job site, the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine filling the air. He saw Arthur Vance's name on his phone and stepped outside, his heart beginning to race. "Liam!" Arthur's voice was low and urgent, crackling with an energy Liam had never heard from him before. "You need to come to the county records office. Now! I've found something monumental." The journey to the city centre felt surreal. Liam drove on autopilot, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. What could Arthur have found? A loophole? A technicality? He didn't dare to hope for too much. Decades of being conditioned to expect the worst had taught him that. He found Arthur in a dusty, dimly lit archive room, surrounded by enormous leather-bound ledgers. The air smelled of old paper and decaying glue. Arthur wasn't looking at the postnup anymore. Instead, he had a massive, brittle deed book open on the table, its pages yellowed with age. He pointed a trembling finger at a line of elegant, looping cursive. "Read this," Arthur whispered, his voice filled with a sense of awe. Liam leaned in. The ink was faded, the language archaic, but the names were clear. The deed, dated 1923, was for a large tract of farmland, and the name of the purchaser was unmistakable, Alistair Collins. "Alistair Collins?" Liam said, his brow furrowed. "That was my great-grandfather's name." "Precisely," Arthur said, a rare, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He pulled out another, more recent map of the county. "Your great-grandfather was a farmer, a very shrewd one, it turns out. He bought this land for a pittance back when this was all just countryside. And this tract of land," he traced a large area on the map with his finger, "is where the Montgomery family estate now stands." Liam stared, his mind struggling to process the information. "But how? They've always said it was their ancestral home." "It is their ancestral home," Arthur explained, "but it's on your ancestral land. It seems that back in the 1940s, during a period of bureaucratic chaos, there was a clerical error. The Montgomery family built their house, and over the years, property taxes were assessed to them based on the structure, not the underlying parcel of land. The original deed, the true title to the land itself, remained with the Collins family line. No one ever caught the mistake. It was a bombshell, a revelation so profound it seemed to alter the very fabric of reality. The house, the symbol of his wife's family's power and his own insignificance, was a castle built on sand, sand that belonged to him. "But that's not all," Arthur said, his excitement growing. He pulled a thicker, more complex document from his briefcase. "Your great-grandfather didn't just buy the land. He placed it into an incredibly complex ironclad trust. It was designed to protect the land from creditors, from seizure, from exactly this kind of situation. The trust has been dormant for over 80 years, waiting for a direct male heir to claim it. Liam, that heir is you." The room seemed to spin. Liam gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. All those years of feeling like an intruder in that house, a guest who had overstayed his welcome. All the condescension, the belittling remarks about his humble origins. It was all based on a lie they themselves didn't even know they were living. Then the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Arthur picked up the copy of the post-nuptial agreement, the document of Liam's humiliation. "This," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is the most beautiful piece of poetic justice I have ever witnessed in my 40 years of practicing law. Isabella's lawyers, in their zeal to make sure you couldn't touch a single one of her assets, included the full, official, legal description of the property. They wanted to be thorough." He tapped the page again. "By forcing you to sign this document which explicitly states you waive any claim to assets acquired during the marriage, she inadvertently made you both acknowledge a pre-existing asset. This document is her legal admission that the property described herein is not a marital asset. She has, with her own pen, affirmed your sole, inherited ownership of the land her house is built on. She played herself, Liam. She handed you the gun and the bullet. The irony was staggering, a blow so perfect and complete it was almost cruel. Isabella's greed, her arrogance, her need to legally cement his inferiority, it had all combined to create her own perfect trap. Her entire family's future, the massive loan they were about to take out, their social standing, their very identity, was all built on an asset they had no legal right to. They were utterly, blindly, and completely dependent on the man they despised. Liam looked at Arthur, the dusty archives fading into the background. The years of quiet suffering, of biting his tongue, of swallowing his pride, coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. The sleeping giant inside him, the man who had endured and absorbed every insult, was finally, irrevocably awake. He knew what he had to do. The time for patience was over. The time for justice had begun. A profound calm settled over Liam. The shock and disbelief gave way to a cold, hard certainty. For a decade, he had been a passenger in his own life, steered by the whims and cruelties of his wife and her family. Now, the steering wheel was in his hands. He looked at Arthur, whose eyes were watching him, waiting. "What do we do next?" Liam asked, his voice steady and devoid of the hesitation that had long defined him. "We have several options," Arthur began, shifting into his professional demeanor. "We can file a quiet title action immediately to have the court officially recognize your ownership. We can send a cease and desist letter to your wife's family, informing them of the situation. Or," he paused, letting the unspoken alternative hang in the air, "or we can let them walk into the trap they built for themselves." Liam finished, his mind already working, connecting the dots with a newfound ruthless clarity. "They're about to take out a massive loan against a property they don't own. What is that called, Arthur?" "That," Arthur said, a slow, grim smile forming, "is called bank fraud. and it carries very serious penalties. The decision was made in that instant. It wasn't just about getting the house back. It was about justice. It was for every snide comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment he was made to feel small and worthless. They hadn't just been unkind, they had been malicious. They deserved to face the consequences of their own actions. "Let's do it," Liam said, the words feeling powerful on his tongue. "Let them get the loan. Let them think they've won." The strategy session that followed was a masterclass in surgical precision. Arthur, energized by the sheer audacity of the case, laid out the plan. The first step was for Liam to officially activate the trust and claim his inheritance. This involved signing a series of documents that Arthur had already prepared, his foresight proving invaluable. As Liam pressed the pen to the paper, his signature was no longer the mark of a victim, but the confident stroke of a man taking back control. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. They would allow the loan to be approved and the funds to be dispersed into the Montgomery family's accounts. Arthur explained that the moment they spent a single dollar of that fraudulently obtained money, they would have crossed a legal line from which there was no return. "While they are celebrating," Arthur detailed, "I will file the quiet title action. It will move slowly through the courts at first, remaining under the radar. Once the funds are transferred, we will make 2 phone calls. The first will be to the bank's fraud department. The second will be to the district attorney's office. We won't make accusations. We will simply present the facts, the authenticated deed, the trust documents, and the loan agreement secured by an asset belonging to a third party. The system will do the rest." The initiation of the plan was almost silent, a series of keystrokes and official stamps. Arthur filed the paperwork. An anonymous, carefully worded tip was prepared for the authorities, a simple packet of information that would set off a chain reaction. Liam went home and resumed his role as the passive, oblivious husband. The waiting was the hardest part, but also the most delicious. He was a spectator at his own play, watching the actors move toward their inevitable doom, completely unaware of the script he now held. The news came, as they knew it would, during a celebratory family dinner. Isabella was radiant, flushed with victory. She and Marcus had just returned from the bank, having signed the final loan documents. The money, a staggering sum, was scheduled to be transferred the next morning. "To the future," Marcus toasted, raising his glass of champagne. "To the Croft Montgomery Tower. Soon, this whole city will know our name." "And to getting rid of dead weight," Isabella added, her eyes flicking to Liam for a brief, contemptuous moment. She felt untouchable, on the cusp of a new life with Julian, a life where the quiet, working-class man sitting at her table would be nothing but a distant, unpleasant memory. Liam raised his glass with them, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "To the future," he echoed softly. The first domino fell the very next afternoon. Isabella was in her study, on the phone with Julian, laughing as she transferred a massive down payment to his development company. She was giddy, drunk on the power the money gave her. Then her phone buzzed with an email notification from the bank. It was a single, terrifying sentence. "Your accounts have been frozen pending a review of collateral documentation." Her laughter died in her throat. "That's impossible," she whispered. She tried to log into her online banking portal. A red banner flashed across the screen. "Access denied." Disbelief quickly curdled into panic. She called the bank, her voice starting with imperious anger and quickly escalating to shrill desperation. She was met with a wall of cold, unhelpful bureaucracy. "We are unable to provide further information at this time, ma'am." "The matter is under internal review." She slammed the phone down. "Marcus!" she shrieked. "Get over here now. Something is wrong with the bank." The reaction phase was exactly as Arthur had predicted. First came denial and rage, blaming the incompetence of the financial institution. Marcus arrived, blustering and threatening to call their powerful contacts, only to find that those contacts were suddenly unavailable or unwilling to speak with him. The cascade effect began with terrifying speed. The wire transfer to Julian's company was recalled by the bank. Julian, upon hearing the news, did not return Isabella's frantic calls. His interest had been in her money, not her. Without the money, she was a liability. By the end of the week, the situation had devolved into a full-blown nightmare for the Montgomerys. A stern-faced man in a suit delivered a legal summons to the door, a notice of the bank's internal fraud investigation. Their credit cards were declined one by one. The caterer for Helena's upcoming charity luncheon called to cancel, having heard ruinous whispers through the grapevine of the city's elite. Their carefully constructed social world, built on the illusion of wealth, was shattering like a dropped mirror. Through it all, Liam watched from the inside, a ghost in the machine of their destruction. He played his part to perfection. He would find Isabella staring blankly at a pile of letters, her face pale with stress, and he would place a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Is everything all right, dear?" he would ask, his voice laced with feigned concern. "You seem worried. Is there anything I can do to help?" His sympathy was the cruelest torture. It infuriated her, because in her arrogance, she couldn't fathom that he could be anything but a simple-minded fool. The thought that he could have anything to do with her sophisticated financial problems was so outlandish it never once crossed her mind. She would just shake her head, her eyes filled with a terror she couldn't explain, and retreat into a state of panicked silence. He was a witness to their downfall, and they didn't even see him. They looked right through him, just as they always had. The final act was set in the one place where truth, however brutal, is supposed to prevail: a court of law. Driven by desperation, and believing it was her only move left, Isabella had filed for divorce. Her strategy was simple and cruel. Enforce the postnuptial agreement, claim the house as her sole property, and kick Liam out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on his back. It was her last-ditch effort to liquidate her one remaining asset and salvage something from the wreckage. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, all polished wood and muted colors. Isabella sat beside her expensive lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit. She projected an air of wounded confidence, the wronged party seeking justice. She looked at Liam, who sat quietly beside Arthur Vance, with an expression of pure disdain. To her, he was a final, pathetic obstacle to be swept aside. "Your Honor," Isabella's lawyer began, his voice booming with practiced authority. "We are here today to expedite a simple matter. My client, Ms. Montgomery, wishes to dissolve her marriage to Mr. Collins. A postnuptial agreement is in place, which is quite clear regarding the division of assets. Specifically, it protects the ancestral Montgomery estate, ensuring it remains with my client." He strode forward and placed a copy of the postnup on the judge's bench with a flourish. This document, signed by both parties, should make this a very brief proceeding. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, picked up the document. She read the first page, then the second. She paused, her eyes lingering on the long, detailed paragraph describing the property. Then she looked at a separate stack of documents that Arthur had submitted earlier that morning. The certified 1923 deed, the Collins Family Trust, and the freshly stamped quiet title judgment. The judge looked up from the papers, her gaze falling directly on Isabella. The room was silent. Isabella shifted in her seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Ma'am," the judge said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel that cut through the silence. Is this your signature on this agreement?
Yes, Your Honor,
Isabella said, her confidence returning. And my husband's. I see that, the judge replied, her eyes narrowing. And you believe this document protects your ownership of the family home? That is its express purpose, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward, her voice dropping lower, yet somehow becoming more powerful. Then you may have a problem, because according to the official deed records of this county and as affirmed by a quiet title action just last week, you have never owned the land on which your house is built. That land, in fact, belongs to the man you are attempting to evict. A gasp rippled through the small gallery. Isabella's lawyer froze mid-stride, his jaw slack. Isabella stared at the judge, her face a mask of utter disbelief.
That's impossible, she stammered. It's a mistake.
The only mistake, the judge said, her voice now cold and hard, was building a house on property that didn't belong to you. This post-nuptial agreement, the very one you are using as your weapon, does not grant you the house. On the contrary, it serves as a legally binding acknowledgement that your husband's inherited property is his alone. It explicitly waives any claim you might have to it. She looked directly at Isabella, her expression withering. "Ma'am, sit down." The command was like a physical blow. Isabella sank back into her chair, her face ashen. Her entire world had just been dismantled in 3 sentences. Then Liam stood up. All eyes in the courtroom turned to him. He was no longer the quiet, passive carpenter. He stood tall, his presence filling the room. He looked at Isabella, not with hatred, but with a calm, devastating finality. "For 10 years, he began, his voice clear and strong. "I lived in that house. I repaired its walls, I sanded its floors, I rebuilt its foundation with my own hands and my own money. And for 10 years, you and your family treated me like I was dirt under your shoe. You mocked my work, you dismissed my worth, and you made me sign a document in a moment of public humiliation to ensure I would never forget my place." He took a step forward. "You spent 10 years treating me like an unwanted guest, but what you didn't know was that you were the guest all along. You were living on my land in a house that stands only because of a historical mistake and my family's legacy. You tried to protect your ancestral home, but you never once bothered to learn its true history. Your arrogance was that blinding." Isabella's face crumpled. The facade of the elegant, powerful woman shattered, revealing the terrified, spoiled child underneath.
"No!"
she whispered, shaking her head.
"No, you're lying!"
"The deeds don't lie," Liam said, his voice unyielding. "The trust documents don't lie, and the bank fraud investigation that is currently dismantling what's left of your family's reputation, that doesn't lie either." That was the final blow. Isabella's composure broke completely. A raw, guttural scream tore from her throat. "You! It was you!" she shrieked, lunging forward before being restrained by her stunned lawyer. "You did this! You planned this! I'll ruin you! You are nothing!" Her breakdown was total and public. The judge banged her gavel, her face a mask of stern disapproval. Security officers moved toward her. Isabella's threats and accusations dissolved into hysterical sobs. She had sealed her own fate, revealing the venomous core beneath her polished exterior for all to see. Liam simply watched for a moment, then turned his back on her. He had said everything he needed to say. He gave a single, grateful nod to Arthur, and then he walked out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. He walked out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the wreckage of Isabella's life behind him, and for the first time in a decade, he felt truly, completely free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The court's judgment was unequivocal. Liam was declared the sole owner of the property and all structures upon it. The divorce was granted with Isabella receiving nothing. Her hysterical outburst in the courtroom had done her no favors, but that was only the beginning of the Montgomery family's downfall. The bank fraud investigation, armed with the undeniable proof of Liam's ownership, moved with ruthless efficiency. Isabella, Marcus, and Helena were all indicted on multiple felony charges, including conspiracy and grand larceny. The press, smelling blood in the water, descended on the story of the fallen socialites. Their faces were plastered across newspapers and websites, their story a cautionary tale of hubris and deceit. Stripped of their assets, which were seized to pay back the fraudulent loan, and abandoned by their fair-weather friends, their fall was as complete as it was public. They were convicted. The judge, citing their lack of remorse and the calculated nature of their crime, handed down significant prison sentences. The image of Helena Montgomery, weeping as she was led away in handcuffs, became a symbol of their family's utter ruin. Liam, however, wanted no part of the life they had coveted. The grand house was not a home to him, it was a monument to 10 years of unhappiness. He sold it, along with the vast tract of land it sat on, to a developer for a sum of money so large it felt unreal. But the numbers on the bank statement meant less to him than what he chose to do with them. He took a portion of the funds and established the Alastair Collins Foundation, named for the great-grandfather whose foresight had secured his future. It was a charitable organization dedicated to providing scholarships and vocational training for young people who wanted to learn a trade: carpentry, masonry, plumbing, electrical work. He wanted to give others the same sense of purpose and dignity he had always found in building things with his own hands. He didn't keep the sprawling mansion. Instead, he bought a modest plot of land in a quiet wooded area outside the city. And there, with his own 2 hands, he built a new house. It wasn't a palace of cold marble and imposing columns. It was a home, crafted from warm cedar and stone, with a large workshop out back where the scent of sawdust always hung in the air. It was a house built not on lies but on a foundation of integrity. One afternoon, while picking up supplies at the local hardware store, he struck up a conversation with the town librarian, a kind woman named Sarah with a warm smile and eyes that saw him for who he was, not what he was worth. She loved the feel of old books. He loved the feel of old wood. They talked for an hour, and he felt a simple, genuine connection he hadn't realized he had been starving for. Their relationship grew slowly, naturally, built on shared values of honesty and mutual respect. A year after the trial, Liam stood on the porch of the home he had built, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sunrise paint the sky. Sarah was inside, reading by the fireplace he had constructed, stone by stone. In his workshop, the tools were being prepared for the first class of apprentices from his foundation, who were arriving later that day. He was surrounded by a life he had not inherited or been given, but one he had earned and created. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. True power doesn't lie in a name, a title, or a bank account. It isn't found in what we display to the world. It is quieter, more solid. It is the strength in your own 2 hands, the integrity in your heart, and the quiet dignity of a life built on a foundation of truth. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose, peace, and the simple, profound joy of being valued for exactly who you are.